It's spring savings at Gr8's Scarf, going on now with huge savings throughout the store. Save up to 30% on select GE Profile and cafe appliances. You can also save on in-stock GE Profile refrigerators and best-selling washers. Shop local and save now during spring savings at Gr8's Scarf. Visit any of their convenient locations or shop online at gr8scarf.com, where it doesn't cost more to get more.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Hockey history has been made.
Here is Ovechkin. Shoots! He scores! He scores! Number 895!
That was the sound you heard on Sportsnet last Sunday when Alexander Ovechkin did what many hockey fans over the last couple of decades felt was impossible. He surpassed Wayne Gretzky for the most goals scored in an NHL career. Gretzky even came onto the ice in a mid-game ceremony to congratulate Ovechkin. Now, for fans of the Great One, don't worry, there's no risk of him losing the title as the greatest hockey player of all time, with his 2,857 points record still very much safe. His closest competition there is Jaromir Jagr, who played nearly 250 more games than Gretzky, but still fell short by 936 points. Anyway, back to the goals. There's no doubt this is a monumental achievement in sports, one that will stand as a moment many hockey fans will remember for generations to come. However, is this record tarnished? Will politics and Ovechkin's close relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin forever be an asterisk on this achievement? I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and today on The Big Story, I'm speaking with journalist Colin Horgan, who's written about Ovechkin's record and the politics behind it for The Guardian. Colin, thanks very much for being here.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
It's kind of funny. I've known you for many years, from your time working on Parliament Hill as a journalist, and now, even though that's not your full-time job anymore, you still write about hockey and occasionally about politics, and we're blending those two issues together. But let's start off with the hockey achievement first before we jump to the other stuff. 895 goals. I mean, how amazing is that?
It's a pretty amazing feat. Like, pretty much nobody thought that anyone was going to beat Gretzky's record. Like, it's been, 20 years or so that it's stood. There's been a lot of great scorers out there, a lot of good players, but no one's really come close. Ovechkin, I think, was always kind of in the conversation as a guy who could maybe do it, and maybe the only one actually for the last little while who's looked as though he could. You look at a guy like Crosby, for instance, who has almost the exact same number of points as Ovechkin does, but their goal difference is huge, right? Like, Ovechkin's, gonna maybe even hit 900, but Crosby's down kind of in the 600-700 range. He's just an assists guy. So even that kind of caliber of a player, the kind of guys you think of as equivalent to Ovechkin, still aren't really scoring the goals as much as he is. So yeah, it's pretty big.
And some of those skilled players as well often run into injury problems. Sidney Crosby had his concussion issues, but Ovechkin never really had those big delays in gameplay to deal with injuries. On occasion he has, but he's been kind of a machine.
Yeah, in fact, he got injured this season, right? Like, so he was out for a couple of months or a few weeks anyway, earlier this season, and I think everybody thought that might actually impact his, the potential to actually beat this record, but. If you look at the guy, he's huge, right? Like, he is an enormous person. He's just a tank. But yeah, he's avoided, the injuries that often plague a shooter. I think, if you think of a guy like Austin Matthews, right, who continually has an upper body injury that everybody sort of thinks is like a wrist or something's going on. He's a great goal scorer, but he does have like these times where he's sort of out for multiple games at a time. Whereas Ovechkin, he scores a lot from the point, right? And it's usually a slap shot from kind of in the hash marks by the circle. He's less of he's using his brute strength in a lot of these goals, the size that he has, the kind of power that he can generate, rather than these in tight dekes and wrist shots like a guy like Patrick Kane or Austin Matthews would use. So that might account for some of the from the fact that he hasn't been injured quite as often, but I think he's just a huge dude, and he, obviously just doesn't seem to get injured that much. His recovery time must be insane.
And it's interesting to see his evolution over those 895 goals, because when he first entered the league, he was that deke, flashy goal scorer. I'm thinking of that famous goal that he scored where he fell onto his back and was twisting around on the ice and somehow from the ground was able to still deke out the goalie and get that puck into the net. But now, I think over time, maybe because of his age and other factors, he's mainly in his office at the top of the circle, sharpshooting those pucks into the net.
Yeah. He found. I think the Capitals found a system for him and built a team. Built a system around where they knew that he could stand and certainly on the power play, just let those things rip. And he certainly he's always been a skilled player. I don't mean to take that away from him at all, but his drive, right? Like, he's just a relentless player. He has the physicality. He's got the shot. He's got the size. He's just this machine. Early days, everyone, when he got drafted, there was a year or two, I think, that went by before getting Malkin entered the league. And everyone kind of thought at the time, well, Malkin might be better. He's, scoring all these goals in the KHL or whatever. And he never really got to Ovechkin's level. I think the thing that you have to recognize with Ovechkin is that there really is nobody like him in the league. There really hasn't been a player like him, exactly like him, for perhaps ever. Like, he really does stand alone, regardless of the goal scoring, title or the cups or anything. Try to think of another player that has played like Ovechkin in the last 30 or 40 years of the NHL. It's pretty difficult. There might be a handful. There might be a couple, but he really stands alone for a lot of reasons.
So Wayne Gretzky was there to watch Ovechkin beat his record, just like Gordie Howe was there when Gretzky beat his record. Do you think that potentially we could see another player emerge where Ovechkin ends up in the stands watching somebody beat this record? Some have made the comparison. You brought up Austin Matthews earlier, that he could be on pace to be competitive with the goal scoring record.
Yeah, I think it might take him another 9 years to do it if he continues his pace that he's setting currently. Yeah, I mean, Austin Matthews is probably the closest. Even a guy like McDavid is sort of the same thing as Crosby. The majority of his points come from assists most of the time. Like, he racks them up, but I think Matthews is the closest. I think the injuries will potentially get to him. So again, it's it just as I just said, it focuses on how much Ovechkin is a unique player, that there might be one other guy right now playing out of all those guys in the NHL. There might be one who could potentially get to where Ovechkin is, and even then, it might not if he's the most prolific scorer in the league for the last 4 or 5 years. So it really emphasizes what Ovechkin's done here.
We'll have more on the big story in just a moment with journalist Colin Horgan speaking about Alexander Ovechkin's goal-scoring record in the NHL and whether or not it's tarnished by politics. All right, so you've written this article for The Guardian about the fact that this is an amazing feat. However, there's going to be a big asterisk when people look back on this for years and years to come.
Yeah.
This is about geopolitics. This is about where we are at this moment in time when this record is being achieved. Tell us about why there might be a bit of a stain on this amazing record by Ovechkin.
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is Vladimir Putin, right? Like, Ovechkin has been in the past a big booster of Vladimir Putin. He organized for one of his elections. I'll use the word loosely if I can. Certainly, there was an election. Putin won it, unsurprisingly. But Ovechkin, rallied for him, got other athletes like Malkin to sort of support a social media campaign a few years ago called Putin Strong, I believe it was. And he's, been up until a couple of years ago pretty open about how much he supports Vladimir Putin. After the start of the Ukraine war, his response was a little bit muted. He obviously didn't really, show it off too much. But even then, he's never really been, he's never been outspoken about the things that Putin has done wrong. Obviously, like, even when he was asked about the war, he just sort of gave an answer like, well, I hope everybody can live peacefully. But, I don't really talk about politics. Well, which is a lie, because he totally did a few years earlier. So you look at a guy like Artemi Panarin, who's also Russian, didn't have that kind of fear. His family there was pressure put on his family at home in Russia, even though he was outspoken against Putin. But he kind of took a different tack. So, Ovechkin will never kind of escape that association, I don't think, which is unfortunate.
And some people and some fans may ask, is it fair? Is it fair that somebody's personal political points of view tarnish an athletic feat?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can never really separate politics and sport, right? People, you can make an argument for it, but it's very difficult. You go back to people like Muhammad Ali, you think back, it's never been, the two have never been separated, right? Like, you can try all you want, but it's not possible. So yeah, I think it is fair to some extent. I think it's fair to say that, as a hockey player, he is an astonishing player. But that, that part of his success was, along with that, he brought focus to a dictator, which, to me, I don't know, will never really quite sit right for me anyway. Others may be more forgiving and focus solely on the game. But I think it's very difficult to separate the two. And I think, you're seeing that now with Wayne Gretzky too, right? Like, it's the same story.
And I wanted to ask about that. I mean, it's no secret a lot of Canadians are pretty ticked off with President Trump right now. In fact, I think there are several polls that show Canadians are not happy with him. And yet we see photos of Wayne Gretzky at Mar-a-Lago during the Four Nations tournament. He was criticized for not wearing a Canadian jersey on the ice. And yet this is the great one. So how should Canadians feel about that?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Like, it's the same old thing with never meet your heroes. But, like, you can't stop either of these guys from supporting who they want to support. Like, Wayne Gretzky has lived in the United States for decades. He's, I'm sure he still loves Canada, but he's effectively an American. He has been for many years. Donald Trump attaches himself to winners. Is it really that crazy for the two of them to have come together at some point? I'm sure they've known each other for well before Trump was president or a candidate. Yeah, I think as Canadians, we always kind of fall back on the fact that the sport is bigger than just its individuals, right? Like, for Canada, hockey is about much more than the people that, the guys who have the awards. They're all part of it, but it can always mean more than that. It doesn't have to just reside with one guy. Like, Wayne Gretzky isn't hockey, right? Hockey is more than him. So you can kind of parse it a little bit if it makes you a bit uncomfortable, I guess.
Do you think if Trump wasn't threatening Canada's sovereignty, that this wouldn't really be that much of a deal? I mean, Wayne Gretzky, back in the day, endorsed conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper publicly, but he doesn't normally talk about his politics. He usually keeps that quiet. And he's allowed to have his own political views. That's democracy. So how much of this is the sovereignty threat, and how much might be people here in Canada expressing distaste just because they have a different political viewpoint than Gretzky?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I certainly remember the endorsement for Harper, and at the time, being surprised that he did it, because typically guys like Gretzky aren't that outspoken about their associations. But I think, Stephen Harper was also known as a kind of a hockey nerd, right? Like, there was a link there between the two of them that, you're like, okay, well, I could see how they might be friends or whatever.
He wrote a book about hockey.
Yeah, he wrote a book about hockey. Yeah, right. Whereas I think Trump, yeah, I'm sure it's probably a lot of, folks in Canada who are anti-Trump anyway are making more of it because of that factor. But yeah, certainly that, had it not been for the fact that he's launched this trade war, maybe it wouldn't have mattered so much. But nevertheless, I still think it's tough to see, if Trump in the first iteration of Trump, which was a little bit less aggressively, imperialistic towards Canada, if Gretzky had at that point also been, so openly pro-Trump, I think it still would have rubbed people the wrong way. It might just not have had the same kind of drastic impact. I think, just another point being that the Four Nations tournament really was a really, really put focus on things in such a way that was probably not anticipated by anybody, right? Like, if you consider the fact that if that Four Nations tournament had not occurred at that point in time, would even the Gretzky Association be what it is now? Like the tournament, putting those two things in that pressure cooker, those two teams in that pressure cooker for like a week, really just escalated things. And I would almost say that the trade war and the hockey thing kind of built on each other. Like the trade war became even more of an issue because of the hockey tournament. Like they just sort of like snowballed. So yeah, I think probably that maybe people wouldn't have minded so much, but I still think it would have been. People probably wouldn't be smearing feces on his statue in Edmonton had it not been for the trade war. I think is maybe fair to say.
Yeah, and as you said at the start, that politics and hockey always go hand in hand. That Four Nations Cup will probably be viewed generations from now, like the previous generation 72 Summit Series. So, those comparisons have been made, and it's I think a lot of us will look back at where we were when that goal was scored by Connor McDavid.
Yeah.
Colin, anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think we're in for another rest of a good season, and he's got a few games left. Maybe he'll get to 900, but I think he's going to retire after this year, frankly. So maybe this is the last we'll see of him.
Oh, well, we'll see what his plans are after this. He could have to try another year and just keep padding on that record, but we'll see. Colin, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Cormac. Appreciate it.
That was journalist Colin Horgan speaking with me about Alexander Ovechkin's goal-scoring record in the NHL and whether or not his personal politics may tarnish some of that achievement. I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and that was The Big Story. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can find us on the Seeker app or on all your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. Thanks for listening.